I've always done what's asked of me.
It's not always good enough to do just what's asked of you.
When Gilmore Girls first aired, Rory Gilmore was a unicorn. She was the rare teenage girl character who always had her nose in a book and was super close with her mom.
She's my best friend.
But this wasn't framed as uncool. It was aspirational.
I want to go to Harvard and study journalism and political science.
On your way to being...
Christiane Amanpour.
It's safe to say that most who watched the original series imagined that after Rory's graduation from Yale, her arc would only continue its upward trajectory towards Rory becoming the next Amanpour. So it came as a surprise when, in 2016's Gilmore Girls revival, A Year in the Life, the young Miss Gilmore hadn't exactly become a raging success.
I have no job. I have no credit. I have no underwear.
Instead, she was a portrait of a faltering millennial.
The whole journalism thing didn't really pan out the way I hoped.
If you look closer though, the original series holds clues as to what went wrong for Rory. Everyone in Rory's life is constantly in awe of how smart and cultured she is.
Rory, you are tailor-made for Harvard. They're lucky to have you.
And as the show progresses, Rory seems to believe her own hype. She bristles whenever something doesn't come easy for her. She becomes increasingly entitled and arrogant.
So I spent a night in jail. Big deal. So did Martin Luther King.
Are you comparing yourself with Martin Luther King?
She's so convinced she's the main character in her story that she justifies some pretty dubious behavior, like having affairs with married and engaged men. Plus, for a person who prides herself on being an achiever, in her 30s, she displays a terrible work ethic.
Sorry, I just didn't have a pitch prepared.
That's a little weird. Thought you'd bring some ideas.
On closer inspection, Rory embodies a lot of the realities of millennial white privilege. But unlike some of her peers, she remains staunchly in denial of the fact that she's not a scrappy underdog.
Whether you like it or not, you're one of us. You went to prep school. You go to Yale. Your grandparents are building a whole damn astronomy building in your name.
Here's our take on what Rory's failures teach us about the importance of forging your own path and taking responsibility for your mistakes early on. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified about all our new videos. The wine world can often seem closed off and snooty. So where does the would-be connoisseur go to find the perfect wine to pair with the perfect meal? Bright Cellars has created an easy quiz that matches your taste to the perfect bottle of wine. Are you a Rory type who loves consuming gallons of black coffee with diner burgers? Bright Cellars has a wine to go with that. Get 50% off your first 6-bottle wine experience with the link in the description. Thanks to Bright Cellars for sponsoring this video.
Stealing a boat is a pretty big deal.
I was upset.
About what?
About life.
Gilmore Girls is about a millennial's coming of age, years before the modern portrait of millennials would come to be defined through endless think pieces about avocado toast and the self-mocking humor of shows like Girls, Broad City, and Search Party.
Working feels bad and I don't ever want to work one more day in my entire life. Oh my God, it feels so good to say that.
As Tara Seetharam writes in The Atlantic, Rory's experiences mirrored or even foreshadowed what would become the defining challenges of her upper-middle-class fictional peers a decade later, from handling the privilege of choice to grappling with a false sense of entitlement.
This is all your fault, you know?
Why?
Because you told me I could do anything.
So what are these traits that millennials are supposed to embody? Inc.'s Bill Murphy Jr. breaks it down into a whopping 17 bad habits, but the ones that crop up again and again are entitlement, sensitivity to criticism, being out for themselves, and wanting to be entrepreneurial without actually understanding what it takes to get there. Rory's sense of entitlement is deep-rooted, a result of both her privileged background and the expectations put upon her.
Harvard.
Yeah, ever since she could crawl, I really wanted her to go there.
A lot of the narrative about annoying millennials is really about white, upper-middle-class millennials.
Miss Rory Gilmore, may I present your building?
When Rory doesn't get an internship at the New York Times, her grandparents can't fathom a reason why she may not have been accepted.
This is preposterous. Who could be more qualified than you?
They were so confident she'd get the role that they already planned on buying her an apartment in the city.
Now, we realize that the Upper East Side is not the most convenient address for an employee of the New York Times, but it's just a 20-minute cab ride to work.
Her grandparents also display a distinct lack of self-awareness by suggesting Rory's failure to land the role is down to nepotism.
I'm sure it's nepotism. If your name isn't Keller or Sulzberg, you may as well not even apply.
Conveniently forgetting their own nepotism in helping Rory get into both Chilton and Yale.
I thought I was helping my granddaughter get into what is, in my opinion, the best Ivy League school in America.
Meanwhile, down-to-earth Lorelai doesn't model this entitled attitude, but she has placed a lot of pressure on Rory by constantly underlining her daughter's specialness.
And if you see a teen walking around with a halo and a book, that's my daughter, Rory.
As much as Lorelai is framed as the unusual best friend mom, like many parents of millennials, she has centered her own life around cultivating her daughter's education and individual success.
Everything we worked for, all these years, her whole future. She was supposed to have more than me. She was supposed to have everything.
Gilmore Girls begins with Lorelai making the choice to do what's best for her daughter and tap into the source of privilege her parents represent.
I wasn't too proud to come here to you two begging for money for my kid's school, was I?
The first season centers on Rory entering private school and cultivating a relationship with her wealthy grandparents. And we watch her gradually develop into the person Emily and Richard wanted Lorelai to become. Hence Emily's blind panic after she finds out Rory and Dean spent the night at Miss Patty's.
She's gonna get pregnant.
No, she's not.
She's gonna ruin everything just like you ruined everything.
But who is this model young lady they want Rory to be really? It's someone who runs to them for help after she gets arrested for stealing a yacht.
She came to me, Lorelai. She told me what she wanted in her own words.
And goes behind her mom's back to get them to pay for her college tuition.
I need money.
You need money.
For Yale.
You need money for Yale.
Does your mother know you're here?
No. This is my thing.
Rory is caught between two ideals. Her self-reliant, hardworking mother who took a stand to make her own life.
You provide for yourself. You're not dependent on anyone.
And her extremely wealthy insider grandparents who can unlock doors to make Rory's goals more easily obtained.
This is the office of a very dear friend of mine. His name is Harris Fellows, and he just happens to be the dean of admissions.
In reality, while Rory likes the narrative and self-made credit of her mother's path, she often takes advantage of the privilege represented by her grandparents.
I mean, I'm a Gilmore. Do they know that?
But what makes all of this so toxic is her lack of awareness and unwillingness to view her own behavior honestly.
We take you in, we pay to redecorate a pool house so you can have a place all your own.
I did not ask you to do that.
You accepted it. You did not turn it down.
A notorious millennial trait that defines Rory is sensitivity to criticism.
He said I can't do it, so I can't do it.
When Lorelai tries to spin the New York Times setback as a learning experience,
Most of the things you've gone for, you've gotten. This setback might help you have some perspective.
this isn't even really a criticism, but Rory clearly takes her mom's words that way and bristles.
And there is some paper out there that is gonna hire you as their future superstar. That's just a fact.
Yeah, right.
Just as she takes job rejections intensely personally.
I'm never gonna get a job anyway.
That's not true. You are gonna get a job.
I'm not. The New York Times doesn't want me.
It's worth remembering at this point that Rory's existential crisis comes after a mere 2 job rejections, one of which doesn't count because there was no job there in the first place.
I got a letter from the Chicago Sun-Times. They're not hiring.
Not to mention that Rory already turned down a job at the Providence Journal-Bulletin, presumably thinking she was destined for something better.
I even called the Providence Journal-Bulletin and begged for that job, but they already gave it to someone else, some non-idiot who didn't think they were too good and turned it down.
Recent numbers say that it takes job seekers over 100 or 200 applications to get a job offer, and often 10 to 20 applications to land even a single interview. Rory's refusal to adapt to or understand the wider context and her petulant response to not being immediately lauded by the top institutions in the country betray that her attitude has really always been more "what would my grandparents do" than "what would my mom do."
I thought I was so in at the Times. I was just saying that I wasn't going to get it because I was trying to be humble, but I was so not humble.
Take the incident with the study tree. Another bizarre example of Rory's entitlement when she becomes irritated because someone else dares to sit by a tree she's claimed as her own.
This is my study tree.
What the hell's a study tree?
The tree is plenty big enough for 2, even 3 people to sit around. But Rory eventually decides to throw money at the situation to get what she wants, which, unfortunately for Rory's personal growth, does work. This gets at Rory's main problem. It's not that she makes mistakes, which everyone does, but that she refuses to learn from them. It's this intractability that's the reason for her drifting aimlessly as a 30-something. She's just waiting for more opportunities to present themselves to her and more doors to magically open.
You basically promised me the job was mine.
You were a candidate.
Looking back at Gilmore Girls, the extent to which everyone reveres young Rory can be a little mystifying.
She's a very impressive young lady.
I wholeheartedly concur.
She's a diligent student, but none of her accomplishments really set her apart.
Every child that applies has the same high grade point average, they've taken the same AP classes, and they're all on the student council.
It's hard not to be skeptical of how simply earning good grades gets her into so many Ivy League schools, or why she's elected editor of the Yale Daily News after she's just recently taken time off from Yale.
I did miss that semester, so seniority's a question.
We're past taking seniority into account.
Rory's best frenemy, the ultra-driven and extracurricular-obsessed Paris, behaves the way you'd expect Rory to behave if she were the hyperachiever we're told she is.
What the hell did Romain mean when he was going on about weeding out the hyper-intense in the interview process? He stopped just short of calling me by name. I'm losing it.
Paris does put in the work and arguably isn't rewarded for it enough.
How am I going to tell him I didn't get into Harvard? What am I going to do?
Lydia then writes that Paris should have been valedictorian over Rory. Quote, she worked her arse off for 4 years, got perfect grades, was president of the student council, editor of the newspaper, and on every committee going. What more did she need to do? Meanwhile, Rory kind of skates by on a mix of intelligence, privilege, general likability, and an easygoing veneer.
You're quiet. You say, excuse me, you look like little birds help you get dressed in the morning. People don't fear you.
But the post-recession world of A Year in the Life seems to finally catch up to her, as Rory finds she's no longer rewarded for acting like she's above trying.
Don't get me wrong, I have ideas. Like, stuff about the world, culture.
Rory has a pretty bad case of main character syndrome. She takes it for granted that both her grandparents' and mother's lives should revolve around her. She claims her mother's life experiences as her story.
You're 16, you're pregnant. You're packing up to leave Grandma's house. It's a riches to rags story. It's got everything.
And doesn't find it valid that Lorelai objects to having her intimate personal life shared in a book.
I don't want my mother finding out I left you in a bucket in a hardware store in chapter 6.
This is such an overreaction.
It's my life, Rory.
In Rory's friendships too, most of the focus is on Rory's problems and Rory's life.
I have to get to the bus stop. Dean's meeting me there.
But I'm trying to talk to you about this. What good is it to have a best friend when she's never around and she never listens?
But perhaps this main character entitlement is most egregious in Rory's love life. Throughout the series, she treats men pretty shabbily and plays love interests against each other. She appears to view married and engaged men as fair game because if they're exes, she considers them mine, existing characters in her story.
He's not a married guy. He's Dean, my Dean.
He's not your Dean. He's Lindsay's Dean. You're the other woman.
When she sleeps with her first boyfriend, the now married Dean, she not only blames Dean's wife, Lindsay,
she's not good for him, okay? She lets him quit school and work himself to death,
but also doesn't respect Dean's adult life because it's not the one Rory imagined for him. Rory has always looked down on Dean for not being as academically inclined as she is, instead of accepting that he's just interested in different things. Step forward Jess, who does fit the prescribed Rory Gilmore mold of intelligence, in that he reads a lot of books.
You've read this before.
About 40 times.
But Rory still makes sure to keep Dean around while she's making up her mind. and she repeats this self-centered behavior of keeping her options on the table when she kisses Jess to get back at Logan. After rejecting Logan's proposal, in A Year in the Life, Rory is back to sleeping with him despite the fact that he's engaged.
Someone's coming to town.
Kind of.
Odette.
And she's dating Paul. While the joke is that Rory doesn't respect this person.
Oh, crap. Paul is here.
Why is Paul here?
I invited him for dinner, and I totally forgot.
Psychologist Stephanie Newman claims that one of the reasons women will sleep with married men is because they crave competition and a need for superiority, saying, feeling superior has less to do with the man in question and how desirable he is, and more to do with being more powerful than and superior to the other woman. The callous and confusing way that Rory treats the men in her life also reflects her signature millennial traits like an emphasis on competition and fixation on the self. In Why Dating as a Millennial is So Screwed Up, Bold's Drea Rose writes that some of the generation's bad dating habits include: we ghost as a way to end things, we're in a competition of who can care the least, we expect a perfection that doesn't exist, we're overloaded with options, we're always stuck in a gray area, and we don't feel accountable for the pain we inflict on others.
Dean, you're my boyfriend. I would never do anything to hurt you.
Yeah? You're doing it right now.
Rory's self-centeredness may also stem from the fact that she's an only child. G. Stanley Hall, a child psychologist who first theorized the idea of only child syndrome, describes them as having a tendency to be selfish and hypersensitive to criticism.
I never realized how spoiled you were, Rory, but I guess that's to be expected. Only children are always spoiled.
All this speaks to a larger problem. Rory has to stop thinking of her relationships only as part of her story and start thinking more about how others feel.
It's my life.
It's our life.
Yeah, well, you write your side of it.
A Year in the Life starts with Rory aged 32, the same age Lorelai was at the beginning of the original series.
Hey, how old is your mom anyway?
32?
Lorelai was the teen mom who everyone thought had ruined her life. But in fact, she worked her way up at the Independence Inn and made a life for herself.
I worked my way up. I run the place now. I built a life on my own with no help from anyone.
Ironically, while Rory was supposed to be the golden girl, she's accomplished a lot less than her mom had at her age. This is in part because Rory has never had to struggle or take on the world alone. Rory's never been seriously tested, so she hasn't developed the resilient spirit her mom built up out of necessity as a young single mom. We've seen earlier signs of this missing resilience. In season 5, Logan's dad tells Rory he doesn't think she has what it takes to be a journalist.
I just don't think you really have the drive to put yourself out there, to be honest. To get a story, to dig.
And it sends her into such an existential tailspin, she drops out of Yale.
All I've been doing is working toward being a journalist. I'm not going to be a journalist, so what momentum am I losing exactly?
But even this doesn't turn into an opportunity for Rory to really better herself. Because rather than being made to fend for herself, she gets to live a cushy life in her grandparents' pool house.
Hosanna, draw Rory a bath, please. Hosanna has a pot of coffee for you in the other room. Interested?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
In her 30s, Rory is at last having the moment of reckoning that her mom had when she was just a teenager. She's no longer finding that the world bends to her will, and she's taking time to figure her life out.
I feel like this is my time to be rootless and just see where life takes me.
The show begins to view her more critically and less like the princess of Stars Hollow. But on the flip side, we can empathize with her more. The fact that Rory is so stuck in her early 30s is probably the most relatable she's ever been.
I'm blowing everything, my life, my career. I'm flailing and I don't have a plan or a list or a clue.
And now that life has at last gotten tough, it forces her to change, just as Lorelai did. A Year in the Life set up a full circle journey for Rory that is essentially about becoming her mother. Show creator Amy Sherman-Palladino has even said that the theme of the show takes after the opening song, Where You Lead.
Where you lead, I will follow.
In that it's about history repeating itself and Rory following Lorelai's lead. Like Lorelai, Rory reveals she's about to become a single mother.
I'm pregnant.
And although it's never said explicitly, it seems like the father of the baby is Logan, the privileged immature heartthrob whom Sherman-Palladino has compared to Rory's dad, Christopher. While the bombshell of her pregnancy would seem like an indication that Rory's hopes of professional success will be even more unlikely, the implication is that Rory will follow in her mom's footsteps in unlocking her resilience. Once she's at last tested, she'll show the world and herself what she's really got. Digging deep into her relationship with her mother is also the key to her deeper creativity as a writer.
I sat down and it just came out, flew out. It's like the story has just been sitting in my brain for years, taking up space.
And the cure to Rory's main character syndrome will no doubt be motherhood, which will force her to stop seeing the world as only revolving around her. A lot of Rory's problems as an adult can be put down to the fact that she was a gifted child. Many gifted children struggle to live up to their potential or feel enormous pressure later in life. They also often plan a career path too early.
You've known what you wanted to do with your life since you were 3. Be a journalist.
The National Research Center on the Gifted and Talented explains that if a career decision is made early due to cognitive maturation without synchronous emotional maturation, the gifted adolescent may not be able to consider the long-range planning, persistence, and self-sacrifice needed to achieve the intended career goal.
If I hire you, tell me what Rory Gilmore would write about for Sandy Says.
Oh, if I worked here.
Sell me.
Sell. Okay, we're selling.
Like many millennials and gifted young people, Rory needs to sit down and ask herself if the path she set out for herself at 16 is still the right one 16 years later. She's spent too long plowing on ahead. The privileged, entitled, spoiled millennial who assumes everything will work out for her. So it's good when, at last, it doesn't.
Moving home!
Gilmore Girls leaves us with a new definition of what counts as millennial success. Maybe career and relationship stuff isn't going to take off for Rory, at least not right now, but she still has a real shot at finding herself.
They've been to college, then out in the real world, and it spit them out like a stale piece of gum, and now they're all back in their old rooms like you.
This is The Take on your favorite movie, shows, and culture.
Thank you so much for watching and for supporting us.
Please subscribe and never miss a take.